Chapter 16, The Battle of Kadic. Jeremy carefully observed the solid black hexagonal building. It's a directional projection of an advanced computing core that directly relies on the multi-core processors of the supercomputer, he explained to Ulrich. May I ask what's so funny? The boy snapped at his friend, embarrassed, while turning to face him. No, it's nothing, responded Ulrich, wiping the tears from his eyes. It's just that it's hilarious watching an elf talk like a mad computer scientist. Jeremy sighed in defeat. It wasn't his fault that he looked so ridiculous on Lyoko. The boy approached the castle and brushed its dark surface. He observed the sparks that enveloped his hands, tickling them slightly. A firewall, he noted. The city wall is the system's firewall, leading to the castle and completely surrounding it. And that means what? Asked Ulrich. Harper tried to protect Lyoko from the first city. When the firewall is active, the computer core for the castle can't be used, Jeremy explained to him. But the wall is open now. Jeremy gave his friend a sad look. Yeah, and I don't know what will happen. A flash of light suddenly blinded their eyes. The castle wavered for a moment like the screen of a television set. Filled with static. What happened? Cried Ulrich. Oh, murmured Jeremy. He touched the wall again, and the black shell of the firewall again disappeared, though for a bit longer this time. Then the castle walls seemed to vibrate with a dull hum. Do you hear that too? He asked Ulrich. Do you hear that too? He asked Ulrich. Yeah, sound like the machinery in a factory, the boy said while nodding his head. It's not machinery. The castle is a virtual structure, remember? No, the problem is the firewall. Someone is hacking it. Our dear friend Xana is currently destroying the protection that Hopper created, exclaimed Jeremy upon seeing Ulrich's confusion. He's about to use the castle, and we have no way of stopping him. The sky became dark and menacing. A blue bolt of lightning struck the castle at its highest tower, shaking it at its foundation, and a cascade of meandering sparks fell from the building to the ground of the first city, dispersing in all directions. The two boys were swept off their feet, but Ulrich managed to get to his knees and grabbed Jeremy by the arm. Come on, he cried out. We need to get out of here. Another lightning bolt struck the castle, but this time the static effect lasted longer. The structure was covered in a shower of sparks, continuously changing colors from black to red to a bright white. Jeremy crawled back on all fours without losing sight of what was happening in front of him. Ulrich pointed a small wall out to him, and the two children dashed behind it. All around them, tiny sparks crackled like small snakes that weaved under their clothes, causing them unbearable stings. Jeremy raised his head above where they were hiding to glance around. The castle in front of them had changed. The black surface that had covered it was gone, and the castle was now the same light blue as the rest of the structures in the city. The rows of black bricks had also disappeared. One last lightning bolt surged into the building. Then the dense storm cloud dispersed as quickly and as unexpectedly as it had arrived, leaving the sky its usual indefinable color. Look at that, Ulrich exclaimed. Things seem a lot more calm now, don't they? Maybe in appearance, but the castle is now operational. Whatever will happen with it, we're about to find out. It only took 2 minutes for them to get their answer. A part of the wall that was just in front of them separated itself from the rest, inclining more and more to meet up with the road. It was anchored in place with large, dark chains and resembled the drawbridge of a real castle. The two boys started to hear a slow, rhythmic noise. It sounded like footsteps, said Ulrich. Soldiers marching, nodded Jeremy with a grave expression on his face. The robots stood more than 2 meters tall and were incredibly robust. They wore bronze armor similar to that of medieval knights, a complex design of shiny plates and joints, wearing dark iron masks on their heads with a row of small yellow lights instead of eyes. From the top of their helmets sprouted long cables that led to electrical plugs, winding about in the air like tentacles. There's a lot of them. I count at least 40 or so, and more keep coming. The robots were marching with stiff legs, goose-stepping in a martial fashion. They exited the drawbridge in compact lines and strolled decisively down a street that wove between houses. Suddenly, Ulrich's face lit up. Look, he exclaimed, excited. They're going toward the wall, but they're taking the roads on the ground, not in the air. It's going to take them a long time. We can beat them and close the door before they get there. But they'll see us, protested Jeremy. They won't even notice us, can't you tell? He said to his friend with a smirk on his face. Look pretty stupid. The two boys left from behind the wall and ran towards the golden road that rose towards the sky surrounding the castle. They quickly passed by Hopper, who was still immobile. The image of the professor was frozen in an amusing position with his index finger out, signaling something below him. He looked like a toy whose batteries ran out of juice. Are you sure about this, Ulrich? Jeremy questioned worriedly. We're going in the opposite direction. Watch this. Ulrich jumped unbelievably high and far. He landed gracefully on the second floating road, the one that was ruby red, and looked back down towards Jeremy. Just do what I did, he called out to his friend. But I'm not able to. It's easy. It's like having rockets on the bottoms of your shoes. You just have to give it a try. Jeremy obeyed. He bent his knees as much as he could, then jumped up. He couldn't stop himself from crying out as his body projected itself towards the sky with such disproportionate force. He miscalculated his trajectory and passed over the red road where Oric was waiting for him, but his friend must have figured he'd do something of the sort, because he jumped up as well and caught him with his hand mid-jump and pulled him down to a safe landing. Oric burst out laughing. "I told you it was easy, champion. You just have to practice a bit." They both began to run again on the translucent ribbon that crossed the first city. Jeremy listened as the marching of the robots resonated between the buildings in an obsessive rhythm. The boy started to feel nauseous. He was the one who had opened up the passageway. If these monsters came to destroy the real world, it would be all his fault. "The bridge that leads to Lyoko is that way," Oric pointed out to him without slowing down, but... Suddenly, the two children froze in place. The wall that surrounded the first city had disappeared. It had disintegrated. They could see the suspended bridge, and further out, the cylinder that gave access to the core of Lyoko. Everything else appeared to be a digital void. The city was an island of homes, parks, and streetlights levitating in the air. "We've lost," said Jeremy, falling onto the road, completely disheartened. The army from the castle crossed the streets and avenues below towards the bridge, and the first robots began to cross it with great strides. "They're getting away," cried Oric, releasing a few aimless punches, furious. Jeremy gave him a scornful look. "And what good's that supposed to do? You want to take on an entire army by yourself? Unfortunately, there's nothing we can do to stop them." Oric sat by his side. The two children stayed there contemplating what to do about the army that was parading through the first city, disappearing as they marched towards Lyoko. Odd's watch emitted a beep, and the screen instantly lit up. 23:59 changed to 0000. A new day was beginning, but this Sunday was not like the rest. The boy readjusted the metal strainer on his head, took a small, slightly flattened piece of bread out of his pocket, removed it from its wrapping and began to munch on it. Eating woke him up some more. "Stop making noise, Odd," whispered Yumi. "First the watch, and now you're crunching away." "And put away that strainer," echoed Sissy Delmas, the principal's daughter. "You look ridiculous." Richard observed the young girl, a lot smaller than him, and quickly put away the pan he had been wearing on his head for a helmet. Odd laughed. The four kids were in the Kadic park. They had been on watch for a long time now, keeping an eye on the silent trees and the muddy grass. But no one wanted to change shifts before 3 a.m. That afternoon, after having spoken with Dido, who was still with the men in black across the ocean, Principal Delmas and Professor Hertz had declared war. Everyone at the school took shelter, and they had at least some form of defense. They had formed patrol groups, 1 adult for 3 kids, all ready to sound the alarm. Richard, who was 23 years old, even though he resembled a scared little puppy, had been considered an adult. After having helped prepare their defenses, Odd had a headache and felt exhausted. Yumi was also exhausted. Sissy, the principal's daughter, was wearing a violet faux fur coat, which was already completely covered in mud. The young girl was unbearable and rather snobby, but she needed to grin and bear it. They were at war, and they needed to fight. "In the case of an attack, do you think they'd come through here?" asked Richard, whispering. "It's very probable," responded Yumi, pointing to the trees. "The wall that surrounds the school is resistant, but the Hermitage is at this end, and they are the ones who built the barrier separating it from the park, so they can remove it whenever they want." Odd finished eating his small piece of bread and balled up the colorful wrapper, then putting it in his pocket. "But we still have the trap," he murmured next, confidently. His hands still hurt from all the work it had taken for him to make it, and they had to cover the hole with branches so that it wouldn't be visible. "Do you really think this hole can stop a bunch of heavily armed soldiers?" Yumi reprimanded him. With a bit of luck, it could give us the necessary time to sound the alert," said Richard, helping him out. The silence returned, only interrupted by Sissy, who sniffled from time to time. It was freezing cold, and small clouds of their breath seemed to form whenever they opened their mouths. Furthermore, it was pitch black outside. No one could see anything. Odd checked his watch again. It was only 15 minutes past midnight. Only 7 minutes had passed, then... boom! Yumi motioned for them to remain silent, approached Odd so that he could see her mouth, and spoke silently. "It's not the noise, it's a vibration." Boom, boom, boom. Without saying a word, the boy lay down on the ground and pressed his ear against the wet grass. His friend was right. The earth was vibrating with rhythmic steps like those of an army. Odd jumped to his feet, sunk the strainer onto his head, and grabbed his weapon, a wooden broom handle. "Richard!" he exclaimed. "Take the phone and sound the alarm!" Sissy leapt up. "The alarm!" the young girl cried with a screech. "The alarm! Why?" "Shut it!" Yumi ordered her, grabbing her by the arm and pulling her behind herself. They withdrew towards the reassuring silhouette of Kadic, while Richard pressed on the buttons of his phone to get in contact with Hertz. "We don't have time!" exclaimed Odd, tugging him by the coat. "We need to get out of here!" "Why?" "Because it probably wouldn't be a good idea to stay and keep them company." The boy pointed towards the shrubbery in front of them, and Richard looked to see the robots. At that, they began to run with their hearts in their throats until they lost their breath. The first robots, of which there were about 20 or so, exited from between the bushes, marching in compact lines of 3. They don't seem to be armed, huffed Richard while running. Yeah, noted Odd, but they seem just as dangerous. The young boy left the others to run ahead while he slowed down to better observe the approaching monsters. They were coming from the woods in the park and marching towards the main pathway that headed towards the Kadic buildings. Let's see just how tough they are, thought Odd while extending his arm with the broomstick in hand. He gathered a bit of momentum, then threw his weapon with all his might as if it were a javelin. The broom handle flew through the darkness and landed with a thud against the metallic head of the first giant automaton. The creature didn't even seem hurt, nor did it slow down, but the small lights on its helmet went from yellow to red. Way to go, cried Yumi. Now you made it angry. It was just a test, Odd justified himself. The soles of his shoes smashed into the gravel of the pathway, and the boy heard his pace, catching up to Yumi. We should split up, he suggested. You and Sissy should go to the dorms and raise the alarm. Richard and I will try to join up with our parents and the principal in the administration offices. Got it. Come on, Sissy, let's go. Yumi grabbed Sissy's fur coat by the sleeve and pulled her to the side, while the boys ran straight to the doors of the main Kadic building where the lights were on. Odd heard the sound of the steps coming from behind him change their pace and, without slowing down, threw a glance over his shoulder. The lines of the soldiers divided in perfect order. The first line followed him and Richard, the second one advanced towards Yumi and Sissy, and the third was continued in their direction. The fourth turned to follow the girls, and so on. Did you see that? He gasped. I'm starting to get a bad feeling about all this, nodded Richard with a frightened look on his face. Jim Morales was keeping watch in front of the dorms. The gym teacher was wearing a protective mask like those worn by baseball catchers and was holding a very modern aluminum bow in his right hand with a series of pulleys on its ends. Disguised like this, he resembled an alien that had recently come out of a sports shop, and despite the current frenzy, Yumi couldn't help but give a little laugh. Sissy, provoked by fear, outran the young girl in a few strides. Alert! Alert! The monsters are coming! She started to cry as soon as she could see Jim under the glow of the school's fluorescent lights. Without a doubt disoriented by the fur coat covered in mud and the crazy expression on the young girl's face, overcome with emotion, he took Sissy for a wild bear. He seized the bow tightly, clipped the end of the arrow to the cord, and pulled it back. Then he aimed at the girl. Yumi threw herself to the ground like she had learned in judo class and took Sissy down with her, but she worried for nothing. The arrow snapped off the bow with a ping and, not a moment later, fell at the gym teacher's feet with a sad plop. Jim looked all around him, trying to understand what went wrong with this athletic demonstration. Yumi, in the meantime, stood and pushed Sissy with all her might towards the entrance of the dorms. Quick, Jim, they're coming! We need to get back inside and shut ourselves in! The cables on the heads of the robots had already started to appear from within the trees, swaying like seaweed. Yumi saw her teacher's eyes open wide behind his baseball mask. She made it over to him with one last jump and pushed him inside, closing and locking the large door behind her. She looked all around her, spotting the fire alarm near the light switches and moving towards it. She broke the glass that was protecting the red button with her elbow and pressed it forcefully. The doors were rattled by the rhythmic sounds of the alarm. The other students, said Yumi, taking Jim by the arm. Are they all here? Yes, upstairs with Walter Stern and your parents. Perfect. Let's prepare our line of defense. The main entrance at Kadic was being watched by Professor Hertz and Odd's father, whose lantern left dim circles of light in the darkness. The professor was, for once, not wearing her usual laboratory coat and was dressed in an old pair of jeans and a camouflage print military jacket. She looked so different that Odd had to pause for a moment to recognize her. As he and Richard approached at full speed, Robert de la Robia's lantern turned towards them. Son! The man cried. Odd didn't bother to reply. The robots were closing in on him. Robert and Professor Hertz reacted with precision and composure. The man raced up the stairs that led to the main building, kicking the door open all the way so the young boys could take refuge inside. In the meantime, Hertz gathered up a large, dark sack and emptied the small red and blue plastic balls from it. Watch out! She cried while throwing one of the blue objects at the robots chasing them. Odd ducked to avoid the projectile, which flew over his head and hit the helmet of one of the robots close by. The cylinder exploded with a small noise, and the air became suffocating. Smoke bombs, coughed Richard. Right, hollered Hertz, and the red ones are full of acid, so be careful when you throw them. The two young boys reached the professor and began to help her with the attack, a red ball for every 2 blue ones. The robot army didn't take a long time to vanish, enveloped in thick smoke. At one point, Hertz called for them to retreat inside the building. Odd was the last to enter and turn the key, which was already in the keyhole. How did you manage to prepare these bombs? He asked, pressing his nose against the glass door. Well, for the smoke bombs, it was easy enough. All I had to do was mix a bit of sugar, honey, and potassium nitrate. For the acid bombs, on the other hand... Look, Richard interrupted them. The robots exited the smoke one by one. The compact line of robots had been scattered, and they were now in disarray. The armor of some of the robots had been stained by the acid, but they didn't seem to have sustained any serious damage. We need to get out of here, said Robert, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. Odd nodded his head. We can head past the office and then take the side door out to the labs. I didn't see any robots on that end. What about the dorms? Professor asked apprehensively. You mean we already went there, but she was followed. The boy paused for a moment to observe the robots that were accumulating in front of the entrance. The creatures remained immobile for a while, then the one at the front extended one of its arms, breaking through the glass as if it were nothing but tissue paper. The helmets of the rest of the robots glowed red, and altogether they began to bang wildly against the door, reducing it to pieces. They had no mouths, so they acted in total silence. All that we heard was the relentless thuds of their fists against the metal and glass.